Good evening, everyone. I know that towards the end of the day, things are getting a little sparse. I hope you had ice cream, because I was just at the TSC meeting, and everybody loved the ice cream. So thank you again for being here at this late hour. Again, for all of us who work on JavaScript and building libraries, building APIs, on top of Node, and also for client apps. It's very important for all of us to make our apps usable and be available to everybody across the planet. So I'm Alolita Sharma. I am a very active participant at the Unicode Consortium. I'm on the board of the Unicode Consortium, as well as I have been working in internationalization and an LP for a while. And I also work as a member of the Internationalization Standards Group at W3C. So again, very happy to be here today, given I really love the energy of the JavaScript community and all the work that I've done in JavaScript. Here to speak to you about Globalize.js, which I've been part of for many years now, and talking about how important it is for all of us as we work in this exciting community to really build great user experiences for everyone to be able to use our apps, both on web, native, on Node, client apps very effectively, and really leverage the standards like Unicode as well as the data that is available open for locales, and cool libraries like Globalize to be able to bring that power to your app out of the box. So again, how many of you have used Globalize.js, just to understand? Some of you. Yeah, some of you have, which is cool, because again, there are several libraries for internationalization in the JavaScript universe. But Globalize, very simply, is a JavaScript library that actually is open source, so all of you can contribute to it. But it also enables your app out of the box for just shipping globally day one. And the cool thing about it is it's very much works lockstep with open standards like Unicode CLDR and other locale data for across the different regions in the world. And that comes out of the box when you use Globalize.js. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the contributions to Globalize.js over time. It's very interesting because Globalize.js has been around for quite a while. Globalize as a library actually started almost 10 years ago. And there have been 65 contributors, active contributors over time. But contributors come and go. It's like when we need something, we go and contribute to the project. And then once our feature is in there, we might migrate off, just use the library, but not so much contribute. But nonetheless, I'd like to give a shout out to Rafael, who is actually based in Sao Paulo in Brazil. And he has been the core contributor to the library for a long time now. He's been involved since the time when it evolved from a jQuery library to being a pure JavaScript library. And he's based out of Brazil, but very active in on TC39, as well as in the internationalization and the JavaScript community. He's worked on several Node projects, and just wanted to do a shout out from him. He continues to be very active. So a little bit about the history of Globalize, because you see new libraries coming up, written by many of us in the JavaScript universe. And internationalization and localization of apps is something that is very important as we build great user experience for all the apps that we build in the JavaScript universe, right? So it's really cool to see the history of this project because, as I said, it evolved. It was announced in 2010 by John Resig as part of the Globalize jQuery universe when jQuery was all the rage, right? And it was the globalization plugin for jQuery. It was initially actually sponsored by Microsoft for building out an interface on top of the .NET Locale database, which is based on CLDR, right? And it was adopted then by the jQuery project and added in as a plugin. And then it was renamed when it kind of got decoupled because it was growing beyond jQuery. People in JavaScript, people who were developing apps in JavaScript were trying to use the Globalize plugin. So it kind of, there was a decision that, hey, let's move this to being pure JavaScript so that it works interoperably across all the libraries and all the frameworks that are, coming up in the JavaScript world. And as part of that, also what happened is, which is really cool in the evolution and has helped the project a lot, is using open standards as a baseline for the internationalization data that you need to be able to build a great library for providing a localized experience, but also using vanilla JavaScript, if you will, to kind of work across different frameworks that have been developing both in the client space as well as Node, if you will, over time. So here's a snapshot. I won't dig into too much detail here, but you can see, it's been gradually progressing where because there were a couple of core developers who have been consistently on the project, they've had the memory, retained the memory on the project where a roadmap of building out different features, whether they came from different enterprise customers or different enterprise users or organizations across different places to add more feature sets. And you can see that in 2016, for example, we spent a fair bit of time on improving pre-compilation support, making it a faster, faster code performance-wise as well as smaller footprint. And this is because, both the client apps, which are used in the client space, whether that's React or other environments, also started using Globalize as the Node, users were. And it's really interesting because, the code had to be refactored multiple times in order to be continuing to evolve and be performant. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, the different features later on, but again, there is a roadmap for the project, and that, I think that one of the things, as I have built many open source APIs and having, I come from the world of Wikipedia, worked on several open source projects. As you know, Wikipedia is a great example of having the full stack being open source. So when you build open source components, whether those are APIs or libraries or tools or platforms, it's very important to also have an open roadmap and also share it constantly with your volunteer contributors, as well as who are great developers, as well as users who are coming in as developers from different organizations. And that could be from within Wikipedia's developers itself, but it could also be other developers like Twitter or Facebook or other users who are using open source software all over. So a roadmap, I'd say, for open source projects is super useful. Because when contributors come in to see, hey, is this feature something that is available on the project or not, roadmaps really help. So some of the features that the Globalize.js roadmap has are that right now we're at version 1.4, and 1.5, as we maintain the current code base, most of the effort that most contributors on the project have been putting in and are continuing to is modernization of and optimization of the code, right? As new frameworks develop, as we are supporting more and more edge devices, different kinds of devices which require very low footprint, and as we go into the space of IoT, how will internationalization work, right? Internationalization is very data-centric and actually requires a lot of data to be available to the app in order to provide a great user experience back to the end user. So modernization of the library is very critical, and that should keep pace with and the architecture should keep pace with how you're providing a low and fast library back to the apps. So Globalize 2.x is the next generation. It's something that we are discussing in the technical architecture as well as the feature sets. And the cool thing has been that we actually work and participate, and as I said, Raphael is on the TC39, I've been on it, but we participate very actively and follow all the discussions on TC39. We'd like to see more and more smart internationalization come into that layer so that fundamentally JavaScript out of the box can provide internationalization, which is very important, just as important as performance. And also, as there is more and more data added into CLDR, which is the Unicode Common Locale Data Repository, it's an open data set, and more locales and data gets contributed to it, using both those anchors in open standards and open source and, to be able to drive some of the feature set which reflects that. So some of the features that are planned, which are actually quite complex, and some of the other libraries like Intel.js actually already have collation, but we'd like to actually also make it available for all the users of Globalize.js. Range formats, for those of you who are familiar. Again, I should ask the question here, how many of you actually build apps for the entire planet? All of your hands should go up, actually, because how can you build a website without it providing the right user experience to everyone across the planet who's using it? So, I mean, how many of you keep it in mind as you do performance, as you do, storage requirements? It really is that fundamental. And so going back, again, supporting ES6 also in the library. The other aspect that we, keep exploring and keep seeing based on usage and feedback coming back from different organizations and developers who are using this is dropping support as different components get unused. And that happens a lot, right? I mean, today, for example, for package managers, we used to use Bower a lot, but pretty much everybody uses NPM now, right? So over time, kind of refactoring and dropping the fat, if you will, because Bower is something that gets lower and lower usage as a package manager over time. So when the time is right and hits a certain threshold of the percentage of usage dropping below a certain percentage, it makes sense to make it an optional requirement. Similarly, support for AMD modules. Then the other aspect really is that, developing more finer grain access to data. How do you actually get atom of data, right? And how can you actually, and that really enables client apps especially to tune what they need to use, pick and choose what, element that they can utilize and giving finer granularity in that. So for example, how many of you, manipulate dates in your app if you have a UI? Many of you do, right? So there are many formats to handle in dates. And, you'd like to have, as a client developer, more and more granularity on what parts of the data structure you can pick and what parts you'd like to, perhaps provide as a different value. So as we add more and more functionality, that's something that's just super important. Similarly, documentation. You cannot do an open source project without good documentation. It's just the more you do on documentation in terms of providing sample code, providing good user scenarios that people have run across and contributed back, hey, this is the way we've used this, providing more examples, and as well as providing good tutorials on using a library well and documenting the usage of the APIs well, the better it is. And that's something that, again, every project continually strives to do, but it's hard. And it also depends on the number of contributors who are actually working on it. But it's a great way to get new developers involved in the project, new contributors involved on the project, and also a big or small library or a framework. It really helps the project in terms of adoption and in terms of test cases, right? So exciting. There's lots of stuff to be done. And it's very cool that we have a roadmap. So flipping gears, again, there are current features that are supported. These look simple, but there's a huge amount of complexity behind this, is that formatters and parsers, so getters and setters for currency. Because remember, currency formats change in every country by language even. But every country has different currency formats, dates, calendars, relative time, numbers, units of measurement. And each one of these items differs based on the country you're serving this in, and your app in, and you're supporting. And that's something that I've seen so much code over time where app developers are hard coding stuff, right? Because they'll take, hey, we're building this in ENUS right now. We're going to support it in our main market right now as we do our cool startup and build our cool app is going to be the US. That's where most of our customers are, and it's going to be in English. Well, what about Canada? It's like we there's French used in Canada. So, okay, we'll build French in too, But if you really want to have that flexibility out of the box, it's always a good practice to use an internationalization library, because then that's backed up by all the standard data for all the locales, and as an app developer, it's really efficient for you to actually choose a library which is providing that for you. Similarly, plurals. How many of you think of plurals when you're actually providing a UI? How many of you, oh, cool, at least I see one hand up. When you're doing message notifications, how many of you think of plurals or gender or grammar in the language that you're supporting? Well, some of you do. So, but these are things we take out of the box that, hey, it's cool to build this notification system that's going to be real time and alert us on SMS or email or different interfaces. But what about the user experience of what you are delivering to the end user at the end of the day? Because, I don't know Korean, but I'd like to give a great experience for folks who speak and use their apps in Korean. I'd like to provide a great user experience in Japanese. I'd love to provide a great experience in Arabic and Hebrew. I mean, and each one of these locales has their own dependencies on what and how you actually build those user interfaces. And app engagement is directly proportional to how good your user experience is. This is something that all of us know, but it's difficult to do. So plurals generators, again, message formatting, very complex because message formatting is actually pretty elaborate, is all standardized. And we're very lucky that Unicode has actually done the hard work in the technical specifications to define. It's the work of many, many developers over time who have contributed to ICU. How many of you use ICU in Java? Wow, you should take a look. So, but these are very foundational libraries where there are technical specifications that have been implemented. So, bottom line is that Globalize implements most of the Unicode technical standard for UTS 35. And there was a decision taken on part of the library and the contributors, the core contributors, that we will follow the standard closely, right? Which means that if there are any improvements or any enhancements or any changes made in the technical standard, the code and the data that is provided via the Globalize is actually true to the standard, right? And that takes a fair bit of effort, because when you're looking at, some of the release notes of changes that are being made on the standards, you want to be able to reflect that in a new point version, right? Point release. Globalize, so how does Globalize optimize this, right? Because locale data, I don't know how many of you have seen the CLDR locale data? Some of you have, cool. But it's quite huge, right? And because of hundreds of locales being supported. Similarly, Globalize also actually uses time zone data from the IANA time zone database. How many of you know of IANA's time zone? Cool. One person, but two people. But again, it's a huge database, because you'd be amazed. There are, probably every time there's a new country created, there may be a new time zone, right? So it changes. Even time zones are not constant on this planet. So when the standards change, sometimes they change slowly. Sometimes they change very, very, quite fast. And the cool thing is that Globalize decided that, hey, we're going to work lockstep with these data sets so that that's actually true to any application that is using the library, to be able to get the most current data that is available in the standard data sets. So I won't go too much into this, but please do go to unicode.org/CLDR to find out about CLDR. CLDR is very interesting. It's actually an open source project, an open data project, which works on data contributions for different locales, hundreds of locales, and thousands of items of data, literally hundreds of thousands of items of data, which is actually volunteer contributed. And that means not only a volunteer community of contributors from each part of the world, but also large corporations like IBM, like Google, Facebook, Microsoft, everybody who has actually been shipping global enterprise applications has contributed to CLDR. And that's something which is very important to understand, because this is a standard data set which you can just take out of the box when you're building an app, whether that's mobile, whether that's that's a native app or a web app. You can actually go and use this data set out of the box. It's also used by literally thousands of organizations. So when it's being used, as the pervasive data set and the most expansive data set, it really comes back, there's a lot of feedback that comes back, and it's continuously maintained and gardened and refined and tuned to be accurate. And that's something which is super important when you are actually serving a good user experience for your users. All right, so I just wanted to bring that up because I wanted to just show you that for each one of these modules, so Globalize, if you look at the code, it's on GitHub, github.com/Globalize. You can see for the core, it uses specific JSON files. So Globalize maintains JSON versions of CLDR data, as well as time zone data, which is really hugely useful for any JavaScript developer to be able to take that write in JSON and consume it. Currency, by locale, date. So every e-commerce platform on the planet uses currency. And everyone who's transacting anything on their apps uses currency. So currency formats are very critical in terms of maintaining back-end transaction settlements efficiently when you're actually using a standard. So these are very, very, please feel free to take a snapshot, and I'll share the slides later. But having this data available in JSON format is super useful. Relative time. How many apps do you see where you'd like to see 3 hours ago this transaction occurred, right? So we're calculating that relative time. And that's something that's super useful. So this is the snapshot of the time zone data in case you're using a JSON version. Again, the IANA version is super hard to download and use. So this is the JSON version, which is really helpful for JavaScript developers to be able to use and run with in their apps. So what I'd like to do, I know that we're pretty short on time, but I'd like to take 3 minutes to go through a very quick example. And this is an example that you can get on the Globalize repository. It is in the applications, in the samples directory. And it's using Webpack. So this is an Webpack app where Globalize.js is being used. And it's a simple application that demonstrates how you can use the different data patterns, that is data formats, for different locales out of the box. And it shows it to you on a web page. So why Webpack? Webpack, we have seen, is one of the most popular ways that applications are using for being able to use Globalize declaratively. And it also allows Globalize to be able to generate formatters and parsers on the fly, right? So it's the dynamism that we get from that is super important. I won't go into this because I'm assuming all of you already know this. This is very, very basic. But here you can see that it's in the examples. This example is in the examples directory on GitHub, and the application is app-npm-webpack. So once you're set up, please try it out. It shouldn't take you more than a couple of minutes. But what I wanted to show you very quickly is that this is an example of ENUS being used, which is usually what we all go to by default. I should have done an example of ENCA, which is the Canadian version of English, so in the Canadian locale. My apologies. But in ENUS, you see on the left-hand side, there's a message template that has variables defined for this message, where the variables are being defined as number, currency, date, relative time unit, right? On the right-hand side, you're seeing a web page index.js where you have the values being substituted and inserted into those variables. And this is very simple because it shows you that this is one-time definition of what you're doing, and then when you actually run this message, the result below is that you're getting the data patterns for each one of these types of elements in the format that is valid for English in the US locale, right? And that's something that you don't notice, but those are all the ways, like date, for example, or currency, the way we write USD, right? And use USD. Now, flipping over, so if you can see the output on your web app when you run it, but you can see that the items are listed The variables are listed on the left-hand side, and the results in ENUS are displayed on the right-hand side. There's also pluralization and implementation of pluralization if you want to use that. So this is ENUS. Then I'm going to flip over to German in Deutschland, right? So using de.json, again, you see that the message changes because the language has changed. But nonetheless, the variables are still the same. And the variables, so no code changes here because you're seeing the variables and the day and what is being changed, the values, all being the same. So you're not changing any data. But because you are in the DE locale and you're using data for German in Germany, so the formats, the patterns of the data changed automatically, right? And this applies to any language in any locale. So this is just a very simple example, but you can see, for example, the date pattern changed. The way the currency is being used changed. And these are the formats that are needed for using this in German. So, I think that, feel free to implement any other languages that you want and add them back to the code base. The samples are all, everything is open source, so please feel free to go and play with it. But I'm almost done. I just wanted to ask all of you that as you build web apps, it's very, very important, and Node apps, to be very conscious of what the user experience is to end users across the planet. And it really does matter that you use standards like Unicode and standards libraries like Globalize, which are helping you drive standardization and getting data out of the box instead of going and inventing and hard coding stuff in your own app, and then having to refactor it later on. Please do contribute to the project. Again, needless to say, open source is always extremely powerful as a way to deepen your knowledge of a particular area that you're working on. And at the same time, also building your reputation as an expert. Hey, if you build great apps which actually drive up user engagement to be 70%, how cool is that, right? And that's hard to do. I'd like to kind of wrap up by just showing this slide that you can see how diverse JavaScript, the JavaScript universe that we all live in is. There are so many of the libraries that are being used actually for internationalization in I18N, right, and in JavaScript. And again, different projects have moved in different paces over time. Many of these projects, if you go and check them out, have actually no contributors left active on the projects. They were, implemented for a very particular point in time by a particular organization, and then, if the developers moved or if they didn't have time anymore to contribute, those projects just lingered on and kind of just, sat. So Polyglot, for example, is a library that was built by Airbnb. And Airbnb uses it still, but nobody else does. It's kind of sat there. One of the very fast-moving projects, of course, is React Intel. It actually is working very closely with TC39 and Intel.js, which is also supposed to be the reference implementation. We work very closely with those teams, and Globalize also, of course, stays in sync. Rest of the, I worked on releasing Twitter CLDR.js when I was at Twitter, but unfortunately there are no contributors on it active anymore. And even Twitter has migrated to using Globalize, right? So again, there's the transition in the open source space all the time where JavaScript libraries just, tend to go into usage and then disuse because we always need contributors. So again, just wanted to give you a snapshot. Thank you again. And you can always reach out to me. I'm always very interested in learning about some of the issues that you're facing in internationalization, and even keep in touch with Raphael. He's very helpful in terms of providing any technical implementation knowledge. And please go and check out some of the Unicode standards. And use Globalize.js to reach users across the world. Thanks again.